Recently, Sunrise on the Reaping came out, a much-awaited prequel to The Hunger Games. As a fan of the series, and after the success of the other prequel, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I was eager to see the new entry in the series. But, to put it bluntly, while I enjoy Colin's writing and characters, this story didn't work for me. I think prequels and sequels are already treading on dangerous ground. I'm always skeptical from the beginning that the extra story was only created to bank on the success of its predecessor and not because there's anything new to say. However, I found that Songbirds and Snakes was a really great addition to the Hunger Games universe. Yes, Songbirds and Snakes takes place in the same world, but it builds onto our understanding of the Capitol and the games substantially. For starters, the games are a mere skeleton of what they become later on. It's chilling to see Coriolanus and Gaul piece together the games as we know them, and it provides insight on why they need to be a spectacle.
Now I know the whole world is an arena, and we need the Hunger Games to remind us all who we truly are.
Or, in other words, to showcase the natural savagery of humankind. In Snow's perspective, anyway. But even more than that, Songbirds and Snakes is not really focused on the games. We meet the Covey, we learn the politics and the social aspects of the Capitol, we see District 12 in the eyes of a peacekeeper, we experience the build-up to the games from a mentor's perspective, we see a betrayal of trust, and we learn more about Snow's character and why Katniss was so infuriating to him. We end up covering so much new ground that the actual game section of the book feels more like an homage to the original series, rather than the main plot. And on top of all the new world building and characters we learn about, the narration is completely different from Katniss. Snow is arrogant, controlling, and simply put, kind of insane.
Lucy Gray! I said, are you trying to kill me?
Just his perspective and personality alone is enough to make the book engaging and worth a read. Sunrise on the Reaping, however, fails to have its own identity. For the third time, we see District 12. Haymitch is an older sibling who works hard to support his family, partaking in some level of illegal activity to do so. He's smart, and he's angry at the Capitol, but for the most part he wants to stay out of the way of the peacekeepers. He's reaped under unusual circumstances, and he early on shows a rebellious nature to the Capitol. He has a bond with a younger tribute who tragically dies. And he initially tries to go solo in the games, but ends up with allies. And yes, there are differences in the plot and specifics, but that has an uncanny similarity to Katniss, doesn't it? Inherently, a story based around the games is just going to resemble the original series. But it's clear that Collins makes an effort to subvert our expectations and diverge from Katniss. For example, Haymitch's name is not initially drawn, or when we expect Haymitch to have an interesting outfit for the carriages, he just ends up wearing the coal mining one. He has much more active mentors, and he is not as closed off as Katniss when it comes to allies. But it doesn't help that his mentors are characters we already know, and the process of entering the games is something we're already familiar with. While Haymitch was in the arena, I remember thinking, well, this might as well be Katniss. Collins is a good writer, and The Hunger Games works for a reason. I still thought it was engaging enough because of that. But to be honest, it didn't feel like Haymitch's story added anything to what we know about the world of Panem. We still have the same perspective of a tribute from District 12, with a rebellious nature fighting in a standard Hunger Games. I think it could be argued that this book was made to be a parallel to Katniss and kind of show that it was just circumstance and luck that Katniss succeeded. But then I kind of feel like the book wasn't necessary because it kind of just follows the same story. But that's just my opinion. With that out of the way, I want to share my Hunger Games plot ideas. 1. Hunger Games, but from an Avox's perspective. In the books, Katniss talks about a red-headed Avox, and I find the whole concept super interesting. This story could cover why they were punished as the opening, and then lead into them watching tributes come through. As an Avox, they wouldn't be able to speak, but maybe they hear secrets from the tributes and capital citizens alike. I think the idea of a protagonist who isn't able to speak would be super interesting. 2. This one is a bit darker, but a Victor who has to go through the Victor life and ends by killing themselves. I feel like we haven't seen much of the Victor life. Katniss and Peeta were a special situation, and we know from Finnick that Victor life can be even more complex and horrifying. I think having a dark ending like this would make sense, and it would show that there are no winners in the games. It could also be a situation where this Victor was erased from history or forgotten about. 3. Stories from various districts that had participated in the war with Katniss, like the dam from the movie, for example. This would give us a look into the other, less talked about districts, and could introduce smaller characters. It would also be interesting to hear about Katniss from another perspective. 4. 13 being created, maybe from Coin's perspective. This one is pretty straightforward. I'm not sure if this would be super interesting, but I think it could cover some new ground. 5. The initial capital versus districts war. Snow talks about the initial war, and I think there could be more on this. What was the capital like before Snow's time? And so on. 6. A careers perspective. I think this is interesting because they are still under the control of the capital, but they're closer to the top of the food chain, so to speak. I think it would be interesting to focus more on the training aspect and less about the games. We hear about them training from a young age. What was that like? Anyway, despite what I've said, I always enjoy a Hunger Games story. I really enjoy Colin's writing style, and I look forward to what comes next. There's a lot more I could talk about, but for now, that's it from me. Have a good day. Stay safe. Bye.